the administration talking to Beijing specifically about tariffs or not?
Well, we're not going to talk about who's talking to whom, but I think that, over time we will see that the Chinese tariffs are unsustainable for China. I've seen some very large numbers over the past few days that show if these numbers stay on, Chinese could lose 10 million jobs very quickly. And even if there is a drop in the tariffs, that they could lose 5 million jobs. So remember that we are the deficit country. They sell almost 5 times more goods to us than we sell to them. So the onus will be on them to take off these tariffs. They're unsustainable for them.
And they are saying you guys are not talking about it. So is that true?
Look, they have a different form of government. They're playing to a different audience. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, again, of who's talking to whom. But as I said, I believe for the Chinese, these tariffs are unsustainable.
And very quickly, 2 days ago, you said you didn't know if President Trump had spoken to Xi Jinping. Do you know now?
Again, I would say Caroline and I have a lot of jobs around the White House. Running the switchboard isn't one of them.
Well, it looks like China just officially folded in the trade war. Trump is breaking China as we speak. I mean, this is pretty amazing stuff. And what a way to continue to celebrate the first 100 days of this historic presidency. So come on in, one and all. Great to have all of you here, gang. Let's set the stage for what's happening here, because I do think it's pretty fascinating stuff. So you all remember that back on April 2nd, 2025, President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs on 57 trading partners across the world, some allies, some enemies. But even with tariffs on 57 trading partners, only one seemed directly targeted, and that, of course, was China. The tariffs placed on China by Trump were clearly aimed to impact their economy over all the other nations. He started with a tariff of 34%, which quickly rose as a retaliation to China's retaliations, ultimately going up to 145%, covering all sectors of the Chinese economy. Now, needless to say, these tariffs were not something that China wanted. All right. China's economy is still reeling from their ongoing property fallout. You may remember this. Remember China Evergrande Company. It was once the world's most valuable real estate company. Basically, it collapsed after the company found itself billions of dollars in debt. It defaulted on offshore bonds in late 2021. And so international ratings agencies downgraded its credit status. And as a result, its stock basically lost all of its value. And the shockwaves of Evergrande's collapse hit the whole of the Chinese real estate market. I mean, home prices have dropped sharply in China by about 30% from their 2021 peak. According to economists, both new and resale home prices have declined across major cities, with annual new home prices falling 4.8% as early as 2025. Sales volumes also contracted, hitting developers' revenues and local government finances. So needless to say, their economy is still reeling from the Evergrande fallout. And the last thing Beijing wanted was this trade war with the United States, especially given, as you heard at the beginning, that we are the debtor nation in that exchange. China exports to the United States are double what the United States exports to China, meaning China's economy will inevitably be the one that suffers a lot more than the United States from these trade tariffs. And many analysts are expecting the Chinese economy to actually contract by as much as 2.4% as a direct result of this trade war. And so many have been saying quite openly that China is, when all is said and done, and no question, a very formidable economy, number 2 economy in the world, no question. But China really is in no position to fight a prolonged trade war with Trump and the United States. And it looks like, as of now, as of today, or I should say as of the last few days, China is clearly recognizing that. For example, one of the first signs that China was starting to break involve their plastics factories. So Chinese plastics factories depend on a gas called ethane that they mainly import from the United States. Ethane is a petrochemical feedstock that's also a component of natural gas. But because of the tariffs, Chinese plastics companies that can't produce their own ethane, and by the way, they can't, they're going under because of the inordinate costs, with the Chinese government imposing 125% tariff on ethane. But if Chinese plastics companies go under, then the whole of the Chinese plastics industry shuts down. And given that plastics are pretty much, for right or for wrong, used for everything, that would only end up shutting down much of the economy. And lo and behold, looky what we're seeing here. China just removed their 125% retaliatory tariff on all ethane imports from the United States. This, according to Reuters. And that's where it just starts. We're now getting reports that China is very quietly, but very deliberately removing tariffs on American goods all across the board. We're talking companies in sectors like aviation, industrial chemicals. They're all saying that their products are being granted a reprieve. The president of the American Chamber of Commerce in China, okay, this is the president of the American Chamber of Commerce inside China, is telling Reuters that some pharmaceutical company members of his organization are informing him that they too are importing products from the United States tariff-free. China's exempting aircraft engines, landing gear, all kinds of parts. Gatestone is reporting that China they're secretly waiving tariffs on U.S. imports, including certain semiconductors, industrial chemicals, and medical devices. All of this adds up to one thing when all is said and done. It is a clear Chinese cave-in its trade conflict with Trump. That's coming explicitly from Gatestone. That's what Gatestone is calling it. This is China blinking. This is China caving. Now, of course, China cannot possibly openly admit that. Xi Jinping's regime simply cannot admit that they're not able to stand up to Washington, D.C. But they're not. I mean, economically, China, at least now, is no match for the United States, especially given the fact that we're the debtor nation. China is certainly formidable, certainly powerful. It may one day very well surpass the United States. Jacques Martin's thesis is correct. His book, When China Rules the World, they may very well end up ruling the world in another decade or so. But right now, they're not the United States. They can't do that. They're not Western economies as a whole. And so there are all of these tacit admissions that China is indeed folding under the weight of Trump's tariffs. Take a look at this. This is fascinating. Zero Hedge is reporting that on April 24th, about a dozen, you heard that right, dozen Chinese officials, including a high-ranking official from the Chinese Ministry of Finance, were seen entering the U.S. Treasury's main building in Washington at about 7 a.m., 7 in the morning, as Chinese security officials attempted to prevent photographers from recording the entry. Again, this from Zero Hedge. So clearly, if this report is true, clearly the Chinese are coming to the negotiation table and they are learning firsthand the art of the deal. Now, what's so fascinating in all of this is how effectively Trump is unraveling the globalist economic order, and China is having to learn the new rules here, as it were, of a post-globalist world. Now, at one level, China has, these last several years, been very busy trying to help construct a parallel global economy to that of the G7 in the form of what's called BRICS. And we've talked a lot about on this channel about the significance of the BRICS bloc as an alternative parallel economy to that of the G7 and the IMF and the WTO and the like. BRICS is already an extraordinarily formidable economic bloc. No question, with the incorporation of the 3 OPEC nations of late, it already is controlling nearly half the world's oil supply. It's absolutely astonishing, amazing stuff. But that said, China is still very, very dependent on the globalist G7 Bretton Woods system for its GDP, since so much of its exports have been dependent on that system. And the irony here is that China really began to economically explode after its incorporation into the World Trade Organization back in 1971. China became one of the major economies of this rising globalist world order. Now, Western nations were hoping that admitting China into the club, as it were, would encourage China to liberalize, to embrace more liberal political norms. That, of course, did not happen. But regardless, the irony here is that China's economy exploded within the globalist system and under its primary institutions like the IMF or the World Bank, and most especially the WTO, the World Trade Organization. What's happening as we speak is that Trump is effectively smashing this globalist world order. And instead, he's replacing that world order with the return of mercantilism that sees trade as an extension of national security. And in instituting the return of mercantilism, he is reestablishing a form of economic nationalism, but now in the guise of what we might call economic civilizationalism, where global economies are now being increasingly organized more around great power blocks around the world. And what Trump is doing, particularly with these tariffs and these bilateral trade negotiations with over 70 countries worldwide, is he's completely eclipsing globalist institutions like the WTO. In fact, the WTO has been rendered so irrelevant that it could frankly disappear off the face of the planet right now and no one would ever know. The globalist institutions that help make China the number 2 economy in the world have basically been rendered utterly irrelevant at this point. It's not institutions. They just don't exist anymore for China to rely on. Now, it's just Trump. It's Trump and the art of the deal. So if China wants to continue to be a player in the non-BRICS economy, the economy outside of the BRICS bloc, it's going to have to now comply with Trump and the new mercantilism in a manner comparable to how it complied with the old Bretton Woods system. This ultimately is why China was in no position to fight a prolonged trade war with Trump. Because Trump basically owns that system now, for right or for wrong. I'm being purely descriptive, not prescriptive. Trump owns that Bretton Woods system now. And China is going to have to ultimately comply with his demands one way or another. And did you see this? President Trump just signed an executive order outlining his plans to create America's first national sovereign wealth fund, and it'll need to be filled up with assets fast. I mean, Trump wants to go live in the next 90 days with this. The Wall Street types are already trying to pack it with real estate and infrastructure and pieces of trendy companies like TikTok. But let's not forget about gold. Sovereign wealth funds love to buy gold in bulk. Australia's been loading up. Saudi Arabia is buying the world's largest gold mine to supply itself. And even tiny Singapore recently added more than 100 metric tons of gold to its vaults. Now, can you imagine what would happen to the per ounce price of gold, which has already been surging sky high since Trump took office, if America's new sovereign wealth fund followed international best practices and made gold a part of its diversified portfolio? I mean, it would potentially make our country a brand new mega buyer in an already tight market. And when there's limited supply and huge demand, the impact on prices, well, let's just say you're going to want to be ready. Now, there's a simple way to get ready, too. It's all laid out for you in the free gold report from my partners at turleytalkslikesgold.com. You want to request your copy right away. You don't have a lot of time in this. President Trump has put the world on notice. A new sovereign wealth fund for America may be coming perhaps in as little as the next 90 days. Take advantage of the time you have to prepare. Get your free gold report now at turleytalkslikesgold.com. You will not be disappointed.
Since 2019, the state has spent over $36 billion. This is during the governorship of Gavin Newsom. We have seen a 24% increase in homelessness, and roughly half of all unsheltered homeless in the United States are in California. So we have continued to spend more and more money, over $36 billion over this time period, and the homeless population has only continued to grow.
California, tragically, is crumbling under the incompetent leadership of Gavin Newsom. What was once one of America's most beautiful states is now being crushed by violence, crime, drugs, poverty, littering, and most especially homelessness. This alarming report just came out detailing the extent to which the homelessness crisis really is worsening in California. Since 2019, the homeless population has increased 24%, all the while over $36 billion, that's billion with a B, have been spent to address homelessness. How did we get here? Well, for years, Governor Gavin Newsom and state leaders have promised solutions. They've thrown endless money at programs that promise to end homelessness. But where has it gone? The California Interagency Council on Homelessness, tasked with overseeing these funds, has actually dropped the ball and failed to consistently track spending or measured outcomes over the past several years. Now, this isn't just mismanagement. It's a betrayal of taxpayers, and worse, a betrayal of the most vulnerable. California's policies prioritize permanent housing subsidies over addressing root causes like addiction, mental illness, and spiritual factors. California needs accountability, efficiency, and solutions that actually address the root causes. Now, clearly, the approach to homelessness in California is ineffective. Again, billions of dollars have been wasted, and the problem is just getting worse. So clearly, dumping money into government programs is not enough to solve the problem. The problem appears to go way beyond the social. At its heart, the problem is spiritual. Now, as Christians, we're called to do more than just criticism. Jesus commands us to love our neighbor, to bind up the brokenhearted, and to serve the least of these. The homelessness crisis isn't just a policy failure. It's a moral call to action for the church. Now that Trump and Elon are cutting back the government, it's opening up a public space for the church to fill in only a way that the church can. And it's only the gospel that brings true transformation, not government handouts. So this is where the ministry Embrace Worldwide comes in. Joining me today to discuss the homelessness crisis in America are Ele and Naomi Weiss, who are the founders and leaders of Embrace Worldwide. Now, locally, they have a homeless ministry on the streets of downtown San Diego, and abroad, they're leading gospel crusades of hundreds of thousands of people across Africa. Now, last year, they also started a weekly orphan feeding and discipleship program to feed and love on those most in need. Now, if you want to learn more about their mission, click the link in the description below. It is absolutely amazing, as you'll soon find out. Ele and Naomi, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, we have heard great things about you, Dr. Steve, from Jeff Rutkowski and John Laychick from Kingdom 320, about your work in fighting for our Christian values and our freedoms. So we're so honored to be here on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Oh, well, the honor's all ours. Thank you guys for what you're doing. I mean, you're the heroes. You're the ones who are actually out there and going on the streets and I guess touching what's more or less our sort of our modern day lepers and, and bringing the love of Christ in their lives. I love what you're doing. um, because in the end, I think, I mean, this authentic healing is. We have a counterfeit today for it, and it's in the form of money and mammon, and it's in the form of government programs. And President Trump and Elon Musk have been cutting USAID because in the end it was being misused to benefit the elite under the veneer of helping the poor. It's actually very evil if you think about it. But ministries like yours are the real thing. You're stepping in to fill that void and help the people that USAID, I believe, in the end, we're exploiting and taking advantage of. Can you share with us how your ministry is stepping up to fix what the government has either broken or cannot fix?
Yeah, one of the most remarkable things happening right now, even in the middle of all this shaking, is that God is bringing to light what's been hidden for so long. We've seen it. Organizations like USAID, which were created to help the poor, ended up misusing funds and propping up systems that actually harmed the very people they were meant to help. But this is what happens when truth is removed and systems drift from the foundations of the Christian faith. And honestly, it's shaken us, but not into fear, but into faith-filled action. Because we, the church, are waking up again to the reality that these assignments were never meant to belong and be fully handed over to political systems.
Right.
It's easy to blame others and to just wait for the systems to fix things. But actually, we as believers are called first of all to pray for leaders and to step in and do our part. Assignments of hope, compassion, and love, they're ours, given by God. And we are the ones called to point people back to him, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And here's the hope, right? What the enemy meant for harm, God is turning for good. Just like Joseph said in Genesis, I think it was 50, you were meant, what was meant for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So while the world sees shutdowns and loss, we see opportunity for the gospel to shine where systems have failed, opportunity for the church to rise, take ground, and show the world who Jesus really is. And I don't think it's just a transition. It's a loving opportunity for the church to respond. And what if this reduction of US aid isn't just about saving money? What if it's God's invitation for the body of Christ to rise up, embrace its calling, bring the hope of Jesus as a response to the needs of the world? And I think God is allowing everything that can be shaken to be shaken so that only what is unshakable, his kingdom, can remain. And as the body of Christ, we're not just filling a gap. We're stepping into a God-given assignment. Compassion isn't something we can simply outsource. It's a calling that's been given to us by Christ. And that's exactly what we get to do through Embrace Worldwide. Whether it's feeding orphans in Africa or seeing Jesus save and heal people at our gospel crusades, or sitting with someone on a curb in San Diego, broken and lost, we don't only offer temporary relief. We bring real, tangible hope. And this hope isn't just something we talk about. It's personal. It's transformative. It's the kind of hope that flows straight from the heart of Jesus. And it's not only about meeting physical needs, which is important and part of living out the gospel, but it's about restoring hearts back to God, seeing Jesus change lives and share the love that only Jesus can give. That's the hope we as believers are called to bring wherever we go and in whatever sphere of influence God has placed us. And now God's stretching our faith again. We've seen those massive US aid trucks all across Africa. And now we're believing for one of our own, a 30-ton truck to carry the gospel into the most overlooked regions, because where US aid once dropped rice and water, we want to bring the good news of Jesus Christ. And it's not just about relief, right? It's about reclaiming the territory for God. God is repossessing lost ground, not through carnal systems, but through yielded believers.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I always thought one of the fundamental, and I brought this up to proponents of secular societies. I said, what if it turns out, just purely on your own standards, what if it turns out that there are social problems and social issues that only have religious solutions, for lack of a better term? Just using what if that's the case? What if we're living in human societies where there are problems that only have spiritual solutions, no other solution. And obviously the secular state can't provide that. And you're showing exactly this. I think you're just showing the beauty of that and the richness of that. I mean, so Christ said he came to preach the gospel to the poor, and you're doing just that, particularly locally in downtown San Diego, overseas in Africa. So in an age when the secular state has so clearly failed to fix something like homelessness, how are you seeing this transformational power of the gospel succeed where the system itself has failed?
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think there are really spiritual problems or like problems that only can be fixed spiritually. And while some government efforts still help people, they simply cannot cure the real issue, because at the root, it's not just about poverty or addiction or physical problems. It's about people being lost, people being bound by hopelessness. And when there's no hope, there's no real change. We see it on the streets all the time. Without hope, there's no change. But Jesus is hope, and not the hope that just fades away or that's for a day, but the hope that really changes lives from the inside out. And in Luke 4:18, Jesus said to us, and he told us too, that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. And that means that we not only give a blanket, but we also bring the good news. And I believe that's the key, because we can house someone, which is wonderful and important, but if they're still lost inside, that's not wholeness. And if we can feed someone, we should, but if they're still broken, they're not truly free. And we believe that only Jesus can make people really whole and fill the emptiness in their hearts. I mean, I remember a young man in downtown San Diego, completely hopeless and just hardened by the street life. And we shared the gospel with him over time and sowed seeds. And then what it really means to repent and follow Jesus. And then one day he said, yes, I want to surrender to Jesus. We prayed with him, he surrendered. And after our first discipleship session, he called his mom for the first time after 2 years. And that way, we really witnessed restoration. We got him on a bus. He went home to reunite with his family in Texas. And that's something that systems cannot do. That's a heart transformed by the Holy Spirit. And we've seen that the same in Africa at one of our last crusades, where tens of thousands lifted their hands in surrender to Jesus. It wasn't just a moment, but it led to impact in churches, in families, in entire communities, where pastors shared with us that, with our team, how they had to start second services because of how many people and how many new believers started coming to church. And there was, for example, a couple, Romy and Violet. They saw our crusade posters and they only came out of curiosity what was happening. And the husband, Romy, had epilepsy, like 2 to 3 seizures a week. It had gotten so bad he could no longer work. So he came, and they both heard the gospel, and they both decided to give their lives to Jesus for the first time in their lives. And salvation is the greatest miracle, right? So they received a new believers booklet from us, and through our follow-up team, they got connected and plugged into a local church. But it didn't stop there. Romy was healed from epilepsy from Jesus that very night. And even months later, he's still completely free. He's back at work now, active in church. And they told us that their whole family has been changed by Jesus. So I think when the world wants to treat symptoms, Jesus wants to really transform hearts. He wants to give new hearts. So governments may offer programs, but Jesus is the one that offers true family. And the government can maybe offer shelter, right? But Jesus is the one that offers true belonging for us. And we've seen that on sidewalks here on the streets of San Diego, in crusade fields, in the slums. And last year alone, in one of our gospel crusades, just in over 4 days, we reached over 200,000 precious individuals with the gospel, in resulting in thousands of first-time believers and church growth in the city. So that's not done by human efforts. That's God's work and him drawing people to himself. And I believe that's the truth, that's what we talk about, Luke 4:18. It's not just a verse that we can admire, but it's really a mandate for us as believers. It's a mission that she's left us, and that's happening right now in the places where the world has given up upon. God is calling us to reach them. And that's also why we preach. That's why we make disciples, because we don't expect the world to live by God's ways. Only Jesus can remove a heart of stone and give a heart of flesh. So we really do believe that when Jesus comes and touches lives, he can change everything.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the image that's in my mind after just the Holy Week we all were able to celebrate is is it Revelation 21? I can't remember. I always forget if it's 21 or 22, where the tree of life is restored, and the tree of life is explicitly for the healing of the nations. And in ancient patristic theology, they saw the cross as the tree of life restored. Christ is paradise.
Yeah.
And so Christ comes into our life, and then all of a sudden paradise starts shaping all around us. And I'm just hearing that as you're speaking. It's just so beautiful. Yeah, I guess a sad part of when the church retreats, and here particularly in the States, I just think in the West, Western civilization in general, over the last century or so, the church has really been pushed into the private sphere of life, so that we have a nice secular public square that can be monopolized, by the modern state. So the old saying is, when the church is in retreat, the state rushes in to, nature abhors a vacuum, as it were. But it doesn't rush in to heal. It rushes in largely often to control. So in your view, given where we are now and the amazing changes that are happening and just all over the world, why is it so critical right now, as the old sort of secular structures begin to crumble? Why is it so critical for Christians to rise up, reclaim their mission, and take back leadership in caring for the poor and the broken?
Yeah. Here's the thing. The state often tries to fix the symptoms, right? But Jesus goes after the root. Governments can hand out aid, and that might help people temporarily, but only Jesus gives new life. And that's why now more than ever, we, the body of Christ, need to rise up and take back our mission. Because where the church retreats, darkness doesn't just stay idle, like you said, it moves in. And often the state tries to fix symptoms when Jesus came to heal the root, right? And we were never meant to outsource the compassion or the Great Commission. Jesus didn't say, wait for Rome to fix it. He said, go and make disciples. And this responsibility, this privilege to carry hope, healing, and truth was given to us. And let's be honest, when the church steps out of the way, the enemy doesn't whisper, he occupies them pretty quickly sometimes. And we see that everywhere. Programs that were meant to help often end up creating dependency. And what looks like compassion can sometimes turn into control. And when the church steps up in obedience, and darkness doesn't just retreat, it flees. And the presence of God displaces confusion, fear, and brokenness. And we've seen it firsthand in Africa, in downtown San Diego, and even in the lives of people many have given up on. When we bring the gospel, we don't just bring words, we bring true hope.
Yeah, I mean, what we're witnessing right now is more than a crisis, it's a call. I believe God is giving an invitation to reclaim ground that's been lost, not through force, but through love, not through criticism, but through conviction. And when we as believers take our place wherever God has called us to be, everything changes, because when the church steps in, the body of Christ, full of the Holy Spirit, full of love, unashamed of the gospel, darkness really doesn't stand a chance. And I think the Great Commission wasn't handed to the government, as we said, it was given to the church. It was given to us as believers, and that's all of us. Wherever we are called to take that ownership of the God-given call, and when we do, it will flow into all spheres of influence. Like what you're doing with your podcast, it flows into all these different areas, and we really can't wait for culture to approve our calling. We've already been commissioned by heaven, by God himself, and that's the truth, that people here are done with empty answers. They're desperate for something real, and the real answer is Jesus. The church, when we walk in power and love, we can bring the answers right in the middle of the mess. And I believe it's really, the time is over to be a passive Christian. It's really the time for us believers to move from like speculating to really be occupiers, because the darkness only dominates where the church has gone dim. But when the light shows up, when we let our light shine, darkness doesn't negotiate. It really has to flee. So the state can manage brokenness, but it cannot heal it, because it doesn't address the real issue, which is sin. But Jesus doesn't manage to sin. He just conquers it. He overcomes it. And the world like really tries to medicate the broken, but Jesus, he comes and restores them. He brings new life. So I believe that's the call to all of us, that we just stop waiting, that we raise up, we reclaim our mission, we step into that gap when we love the least, the lost, and the broken, like Jesus commanded us to do. We don't just help people but to survive, but we help them to come alive in him. So yeah.
I love what you just said. Just because we do tend to doom. There's a lot we call them doomers. We're always focusing on crisis after crisis, and there's plenty of them, no question.
Yeah.
But I love what you said. With every crisis, there's a call, and so stop focusing on the crisis and start focusing on the call. What is this crisis an opportunity for you to do now and to rise up? And I love what you say, to occupy, to take dominion. This notion that the church is, like you're saying, there's a shaking going on for the purpose of just the I think in many ways, I've heard it put this way, the secular society rotting, as it were, is actually becoming compost. And underneath compost are these seeds, these eternal seeds that never disappear, that are always there, that are coming out and blossoming again and bringing paradise back. Like you said, the only real solution in the end is not medicine, it's immortality, it's eternity, it's that which is true yesterday, today, and forever. So for those inspired by this, I know I am already just chatting with you, but for those inspired to join this amazing move of God, I mean, you're in San Diego, you're seeing extraordinary things happening in Africa. Can you tell us, how can people sow into your ministry, and what kind of incredible impact does every dollar sown into your ministry have in reaching the unreached with the gospel?
Thank you so much. Yes, if you want to make an eternal impact, we invite you to partner with us at partnerwithembrace.com. Partnerwithembrace.com. Every 78 cents helps us reach a person with the gospel in person. That's not just a number, that's real people hearing the name of Jesus and hearing the full gospel. And we run lean, so no fluff, no waste. Every gift goes straight to the front lines to reach hearts for Jesus. Tens of thousands of new believer booklets, meals for orphan children, the truck to bring the gospel to the lost. And we don't stop at salvations. We disciple by training and raising up local leaders to carry the fire even further. When you give, you're not funding a program, you're fueling a move of God. And we're putting the gospel into hands, we're in hearts and places that have been forgotten and are desperate for true hope in Jesus. And think about this, every dollar isn't just giving, it's sending light into darkness, sending truth into deception, sending the hope of Jesus to the lost. And you may never step on a plane to Africa or sit hours on a sidewalk with those living on the streets, but when you sow, your obedience flies further than you ever could. And this is what a lot of people call nowadays EROI, which is eternal return on investment. So whether you have it on your heart to join our monthly mission partner team with any amount, or want to sow a gift today, thank you for changing lives for eternity. To give, you can visit partnerwithembrace.com, partnerwithembrace.com, and join us reaching hearts for Jesus and making disciples for eternal fruit.
I love it. EROI. Oh my, that's so awesome. I was just talking about tariffs too, and it makes the tariffs look so trivial by comparison. That's so brilliant, so beautiful. I love what you guys are doing. You obviously you walk the talk. You put acts to your gospel, right? As I've heard it put, there's no gospel without acts. So, so for those watching who are feeling, a tug in their heart, but think, I'm not ready, I'm not enough, I'm not equipped to do anything like this. I mean, what would you say to encourage them to step into what God's doing? Because clearly the church is on the move right now all over the world. You're seeing it in Africa. One stat I read is that the sub-Saharan church is actually growing faster than population growth. And the fastest growing population in the world right now is sub-Saharan Africa. So that suggests extraordinary numbers of conversions that are happening there. So you're right there. You're on the front lines. What would you say to encourage those who think they might want to step up and get in the game, as it were?
Yeah. Well, God really doesn't call the qualified. He uses the willing hearts. I mean, all throughout the Bible, we see God using the willing, not the perfect. But I believe what God needs is pure and surrendered hearts to do his will on the earth. So we never felt qualified when we started, or even now. We were just two people who said yes, and that's all that God needs. And I believe it's never been about abilities, but it's about being available. And God uses the broken, he uses the weak, he uses the surrendered. And I believe the more we know for our personal lives, our own need for God, the more God can flow through us. So if you feel small or you feel unqualified or unskilled, I believe it's the perfect setup for God to do something massive, something supernatural, where you will look at your life and say, only God could have done that. And that's the life we all want to live, right? So when we look even in the Bible at the disciples, they weren't all scholars or top people in the world. At least 4 of the 12 were fishermen, but they had fire. They had a yes. And that's what God is still looking for today. So wherever you are, wherever God is calling you to be, in business, in a classroom, in your home, with your kids on a campus, if you say yes to God, I believe He will move mountains, and you can be a true light for Jesus right where you are. But all we must do is just let the light shine.
Yeah, so God isn't looking for celebrities. He's raising up carriers of glory. You don't need a pulpit to preach. You need a burning heart, right? You're not too late. You're not too broken. You're not too small. You're exactly who God is looking for to move through right now. The harvest is ripe. The time is now. So step into what God has for you. And to learn more, you can partner with Embrace Worldwide and at partnerwithembrace.com. Let's say yes together and watch Jesus do the impossible.
It's so wonderful. Yeah, gang, we talk about it all the time. We are in the midst of the greatest religious renewal the world has ever seen. That's a direct quote from one of the scholars over at Baylor University, sociologist. We just haven't seen anything like this before. And Eliel and Naomi, they're right on the front lines of it, and God's using them to help raise up a whole new world of faith and family and freedom. So check out this incredible mission work of Eliel and Naomi just by clicking on the link below and see what they're doing in America and across the world. Again, the link is down below, and I think you are going to, it's going to be a joy to be partnering with them and how they're bringing the kingdom of God into the world. So Eliel and Naomi, thank you so much for coming out. You're heroes. I love what you're doing, and we all do. Thank you for being faithful and acting on that faithfulness. And just you always have friends here. We'd love to have you back.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you to you for being such a voice in our generation. We really need it, and we are so grateful that we got to be on the podcast with you today. So thank you so much, Dr. Steve.
Thank you, guys. Hey, gang, owing back taxes is a huge burden, and unfortunately, the pandemic relief is over, and the IRS is on its way to make you pay up. They've hired thousands of new agents and sent over 5 million pay-up letters in 2024 alone. But if you're dealing with this mess, I want to connect you with a real, tangible solution. Don't give up your rights or deal with them alone. The IRS is obviously not your friend. Let Tax Network USA, a trusted tax relief firm, save you the time and money you deserve to keep. They've saved Americans over $1 billion in back taxes and have the skills needed to secure you the best possible deal. From a few thousand to $10 million, business to personal taxes, let Tax Network USA restore your good standing so you can strengthen your financial foundation. When your situation is secure, you become the pillar of strength our nation needs. Call 1-800-245-6000 for a private free consultation or visit tnusa.com/Turley. All right, let's go on to our hotline. We have a hotline, 717-844-5984. You can call in and leave your recorded question, and we'll play it here. Try to keep it under 30 seconds. That makes it a lot easier, but let's see what you guys got for me today.
Hi, Dr. Steve. This is Charles from Grass Valley, California. My question is, why is the left okay with illegal gang members in like MS-13 having weapons, or transgender cult members killing students at a Christian school, but they're against law-abiding citizens from owning firearms? Just wondering. Thanks. I love your show. Look forward to your answer. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Oh, thanks, Charles. Very kind of you. Yeah. There is a kind of, we were just talking with our guests here, there is a kind of strange inversion in leftism that you see like in Genesis chapter 3. So when God creates the world, he creates the world with an order, an economy of goods, as it were. And he creates the animals, and then he creates man, and he creates woman. And then there's this order. There's God, there's man, there's woman, there's animals, there's just basic structure to it. And then in Genesis 3, you see the whole thing is inverted, right? And so you have a serpent who speaks, and that's significant because in Hebraic theology, only words can create. So the serpent is creating an alternative reality, as it were. So he's on top, and then he is guiding the woman or directing the woman, obviously falsely, and then the woman is guiding the man falsely, and then God's completely forsaken in the whole picture. So I think in many respects you have this kind of bizarre inversion of the world in leftism. There's a number of reasons for it, but I mean, there's many strands. One strand is basic cultural Marxism, and this goes to the notion of repressive tolerance of Herbert Marcuse back in the 1960s. You could read the essay; it's online. Again, this is kind of the intellectual root of it. Most people have not read Marcuse, but the intellectual roots of it is anything that is opposed to the dominant culture. Because remember, cultural Marxists have made their peace with money. They're not economic or class Marxists. They're cultural Marxists. So they don't see the world so much as rich and poor per se. They see the world as Western and non-Western. And it's the Western populations that are the bourgeois, and it's the non-Western populations that are now the proletariat who are being oppressed. And so what we do in repressive tolerance is we tolerate anything and everything from non-Western cultures, non-Western sensibilities, and so on. Whatever they want, whatever they believe, we put that to a primacy, no matter what. That's key. And then whatever is Western, whatever promotes Western civilization, you repress it. That's this repressive tolerance, like square circles kind of stuff. You stand against whatever Westerners affirm, as it were, whatever they value. And what you got to get in this binary is that the oppressor is always bad and always evil, no matter what. And the oppressed is always good, no matter what. That's the deal of a repressive tolerance. That's the deal of it. And so in the end, then, what that means is that the oppressed can do whatever they want, quite literally. You can have some of the most mean figures, ornery figures imaginable, and they're still virtuous because of the group to which they belong. Again, we're not being judged by our individual character. We're being judged on the group categories that we belong to in cultural Marxism. So no matter what, even if they're breaking the law, even if they are crossing the border illegally, or if they're gang members, whatever it is, they're going to find a way to spin it such that you're responsible if you happen to embody the oppressor side of the binary, being part of being a defender and a exemplar of Western civilization. So whatever is exemplifying Western civilization, whatever defends it, whatever champions it, that is evil by definition. And whatever is non-Western and has been oppressed, that is good by definition. And the exemplars, the various peoples that comprise oppressor versus oppressed are going to be treated with that kind of repressive tolerance paradigm in place. So that's why some people, it's technically referred to as anarcho-tyranny in terms of how it works itself out. So there are some people that are literally above the law, as we're finding out. We got lectured by the legacy media for weeks. We're being told nobody's above the law, and then all of a sudden, a Madison, Wisconsin judge actually gets caught red-handed doing something criminal, illegal, and but she's a hero, according to David Brooks in the New York Times. That's heroic. She's standing up to this fascist dictatorship or whatever it is. So bottom line, there are just some people who are above the law because they have the they have the moral leverage always over those who are oppressors. And even when oppressors are right, still they're to be marginalized, and they're to be degraded, because in the end, you give them an inch and they'll just try to oppress you again. That kind of stuff. It's insane, but that's the world in which we live.
Dr. Turley, this is Susan from Connecticut, and MAGA in Connecticut. Anyway, could you do an in-depth the reason why the Ukraine thing started in 2014? Because I do know Chris Murphy and McCain were over there riling them up. And I also heard Lindsey Graham was there in 2015. But the reason why, and maybe you could get in touch with that Patrick Lancaster, of course he's over there, but Tucker Carlson had him, and he really gave a good rundown. But no one mentions Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. And I know it to be true because we have the actual article cut out in our newspaper from 2013. All right. Thank you. And I love your personality. You cheer everybody up when you come on. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan. And God bless you. You're in my old stomping grounds. I grew up in Connecticut, right outside of New Haven. So 2014 is pivotal. It actually goes back to, I believe it was 2006, 2007, the Munich conference, when Putin delivered sort of an ultimatum paper to NATO. The Munich Security Conference was a conference. It's still held. That's the same conference that J.D. Vance just spoke at, where he excoriated all the European leaders for violating, free speech values and so on, and pushing their attempts to push back against populism and their people and so forth. That Putin used to come to that conference quite regularly. Remember, there was a possibility that Russia might even join NATO at one point. So this is relatively early on, almost 20 years ago. He spoke at the Munich conference, and he warned against what's called eastward encroachment of NATO. So under George Herbert Walker Bush, when Helmut Kohl, the then Chancellor of Germany, had proposed that Western and Eastern Germany reunite, that would require NATO to encroach into Eastern Germany, that, of course, the Soviets had just lost with the fall of the Berlin Wall. But that meant something, and they lost the Warsaw Pact, and they saw that as a threat to their national security if NATO were to start moving and encroaching towards Russia, or at that time the Soviet Union's borders. George Herbert Walker Bush assured Mikhail Gorbachev that would never happen. We're not going to do that. Fast forward 10 years later, 1998, and all of a sudden, what was it? Hungary and was it? I think it was the Czech Republic. I'm forgetting, but two countries, former Soviet satellites, were incorporated into NATO, and it's just ballooned in membership, going all the way all throughout Eastern Europe ever since. And so I think what was it originally? Something 12 nations, and now it's like 24, 25 nations, something like this, just basically doubled in size. And in 2007, Putin at the Munich Security Council, and you can watch it on YouTube. It's translated and everything. Putin said there is a red line. You were not supposed to be doing this. You were not supposed to be encroaching on us any more than we would be encroaching on you via, say, Cuba and Mexico. You're not supposed to be. We have a security sphere, and that security sphere, the border, is Belarus, Ukraine, and Georgia. If you so much as try to touch Belarus, Ukraine, and Georgia, we're done. You're going to force us to act. We're going to push back militarily against you. What does NATO officials do the following year? Because, again, we were the sole superpower in the world. Everybody else was demonstrably economically, militarily weaker than we were. What do we do next year? We offer NATO membership to Ukraine and Georgia. That forced this Putin into Georgia to solve these color revolutions that were happening there to try to get a pro-Western government in Georgia. And then they were attempting around the same time similar color revolutions in Ukraine. When we get to 2014, fast forward, it becomes successful. They actually depose Yanukovych, who's a pro-Russian president of Ukraine. They deposed him, and then they put in a pro-Western government at the behest of Victoria Nuland of the State Department. And we have the transcripts published by the BBC where Nuland talks about actually bringing in staff from the State Department to function as part of the interim president's cabinet and even members of the Ukrainian parliament. At that time, then, the Russian speakers and ethnic Russians in the Donbass basically announced their independence. They split from Kiev because they don't want to be under this pro-American, pro-Kiev kind of, or pro-Ukrainian administration. And then an all-out civil war breaks out. Russians are arming, helping to arm the Donbass separatists in Donetsk and Lugansk. NATO begins arming the Ukrainians. And that's when Putin said, you may not have signed a treaty annexing, as it were, Ukraine into NATO. But when you start arming them with NATO weapons, you've made them a de facto NATO nation. And Putin made it very clear, we're not going to tolerate that. So what's the first thing he does? He snatches up Crimea, which has a major Russian naval base there that they protected. They snatched up Crimea, and it also has a lot of Russian, historical meaning, as it were, particularly with Prince Vladimir and 988, the Christianization of Russia, and so on. And then all we saw since 2014 is more and more efforts of NATO to incur into Ukraine, and that was it. Russia in February of 2022 acted. And they decided to take over the Donbass region and Zaporozhye and just the whole eastern part of the Russian-speaking portion of Ukraine, and then to leave the rest a wreck. Basically, okay, you can have it if you want after this, but there's not going to be a lot of Ukraine left. So that, I believe, is what ultimately started the Ukraine war. I have been saying that from day one, from, what was it, February 20, I can't remember, it was the 22nd, 24th, but from late February onward, and there were just a few of us at the time. We got a lot of pushback. Everybody thought Putin was he didn't have enough puppies to kick, so he just decided to invade, or you get the Peter Zion nutty thesis that Putin just wants to reassemble the Soviet Union and wants to, or because of land issues and demographic issues, he wants to bring in Latvia and Poland and all this sort of nonsense. And I mean, from 2007 onward, Putin has been absolutely steely, crystal clear. Ukraine is off limits to NATO. You incur into NATO. That's it. That's the red line. We incurred. We did it. And I think we're all paying the price now.
Dr. Steve, I'm wondering if the New York State Supreme Court is finally going to reverse the decision of the Letitia James case against Trump, now that she's getting ready to be perp walked supposedly on Monday. Thanks for taking my question. Hope you're well and stay well. Bye.
Thank you so much. Great question. And I would love to see that as well. Yeah, I have a feeling that it's going to be overturned. It's so absurd on the face of it. Again, it's a federal charge that was tried at a state level in a Manhattan jurisdiction. So it's an absurd charge, or all whatever 30 plus charges. And I have no question that it's going to be overturned. Whether Letitia James is the one that's going to finally drop it, we'll have yet to see. But yeah, no question. I don't think any of these are going to stick in any way, shape, or form at any point here. All right, guys, with that, I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning as we continue to assess the rise of a new civilizationalist world order all over the planet. Amazing stuff going on.